149. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Probes, sondes, and sounds is the title of today's lecture. And today's lecture, at least for 2/3 of the time, will be rather different from those in the past. In the last 3 lectures, we've concerned ourselves almost entirely with signals which could be obtained from what is really normally thought of the surface of our bodies. That's really our skin. The whole idea of probes and sondes really incorporates in it pushing something down into the interior. Now, perhaps I've misled you in my previous lectures, but of course, the whole passage from our mouth to our rectum is really also part of the outside, because we are really a tube 30 feet long, so the tube varies in diameter at various stages, and at least 2 of the sections of today's lecture will deal with devices which we're going to introduce into the body without, however, piercing the skin, as it were. So some of the skin is the mucosa which lines our inside. Now, the first subject I would like to deal with is how to literally look inside the body, putting an instrument either into the mouth or the rectum, or possibly be looking down into the lungs. Now, I'm sure that every one of you will have been told at some time or another that light travels in straight lines. Well, I'm going to show you here that this doesn't always appear to be true. I have a perspex rod here, and quite clearly, even though it's bent into all sorts of clever curves, a good deal of the light comes out of the outside here. So we've piped light along here, more or less as if it were an electrical conductor carrying electricity, or a water pipe carrying water. Now, why isn't the light obeying the ordinary laws and traveling in straight lines? To be able to understand this, we have to go and first learn a little about some simple optical phenomena. What I've got here is a tank of water, and this tank of water has been colored with a dye called fluorescein, so that a beam of light which we shine through this tank can be seen through some distance of it anyway. So there's an intense beam of white light coming along here. It's being reflected below the surface of the water onto another mirror, and I can change the angle of this mirror, and you see that if the angle between the beam of light and the surface of the water is a relatively large angle, the light travels straight through. You can see the light illuminating my hand there. If I progressively decrease this angle between the surface of the water, you find suddenly the surface of the water, the surface between the water and the air begins to act like a mirror. And you can see the light zigzagging, being reflected again from the bottom, and possibly you can just see another zigzag coming off again. So somehow or other, we've trapped the beam of light, which would otherwise have shot off again into the air. We've trapped it inside the water. Now, the phenomenon which we see here is called total internal reflection. And it occurs whenever we have a beam of light traveling inside a relatively dense medium, like glass or water or plastic, and meeting an interface between a much less dense medium, like air. The actual difference in the refractive index, as this power to bend light is called, will only determine at what angle this total internal reflection occurs. Now, it's one of the clever things about total internal reflection that, unlike a mirror, it doesn't actually absorb any energy. So if we had two surfaces which are parallel to one another, at both of which total internal reflection occurred, then we could bounce the light between them for as many times as we liked, providing always that the actual substance inside here wasn't absorbing light itself. Now, it's that kind of phenomenon which is taking place inside this perspex rod. But perhaps to understand it a bit more clearly, let us look at a slide here. Here I've illustrated again our water surface. If the angle is large here, the light goes straight through. If it becomes smaller, it's bent very close to the surface. And if it becomes even smaller than that, this effect of total internal reflection occurs. If we have a bent piece of this material, like a plastic rod, for instance, as we have over there, exactly the same phenomenon can occur inside here, the light bouncing forwards and backwards. Now, the important thing to remember is that this only occurs if the refractive index outside here is lower than the refractive index of the material from which the rod is made. Just to prove this to you, I've got here a little basin of a liquid which has a refractive index which is higher than that of the perspex rod. It's not easy to find liquids to do this, because most liquids have refractive indices which are lower than that of solids. But just watch carefully what happens to the light. Because if I'm right, my light pipe should become very leaky, because we don't have this interface at which total internal reflection occurs. And you see the light virtually goes out, and the light leaks out of the pipe and illuminates the side of my little tank here. Like that. Now, the reason that you can see this light pipe at all, the reason why all the light isn't coming out of the end, is that the system is very sensitive to minor imperfections in the surface. For instance, if I were to stir the top of my tank here, like that, you can see that very quickly the effect is disturbed, because now we get all sorts of different angles between the light beam and the surface. So if I were to commit a piece of vandalism and quite deliberately file a notch into here, that's to disturb the smooth surface, you find that there is a major light leak will develop here. You see, there's now a light patch here, merely because I've roughened up the surface. Now, it wouldn't be very difficult if I was interested in making just big light guides, and dentists and doctors may use these, for instance, for looking down the back of your throat. But it's a question of having a torch at one end of a system of this kind, and a stubby piece of perspex bent into the appropriate shape to look down the back of your throat. It isn't so very difficult to keep the surface smooth. But if you wanted to make a flexible light guide, so for instance you could pass it down into your stomach, then it wouldn't be any good trying to use a thick rod of this kind. So you have to use the same technique as we use at home when we want to make a flexible piece of electrical conductor. We don't use a single thick copper wire to connect our electric fire to the plug on the wall. If we want the wire to be flexible, we subdivide the total amount of copper which we require into lots of thin wires, and individually these are very much more flexible. So if you wanted to make a flexible light guide, you'd have to use a very large number of thin fibers. Now, if you were to put all these thin fibers into a bundle, the chances of getting dirt and contamination and scratches onto these individual fibers would be very considerable. And you would lose most of the light by phenomena such as this phenomenon here, where a lot of the light leaks out of the side of the fiber. So a very cunning trick has been developed to overcome this. And what people are doing now is that they make a sheath of a glass or plastic of a lower refractive index around the main body of the light pipe, or the light fiber. Now, the total internal reflection now occurs at the junction between the high refractive index material in the middle and the lower refractive index, which provides a sort of sheath, like the insulation on the wire. And this surface, of course, is now totally protected from contamination, because it's a join between glass and glass, and therefore very well protected indeed. And there's now a large industry which makes light guide fibers of the sheath type using a very special glass, which itself has got a very small absorption for light, and a lower refractive index glass to make a coating on it, so that the surface at which reflection occurs is well protected. And you can make these light fibers almost any length you like. In fact, I've got a drum here of a twin light fiber. It's just like, it looks just like the flex which you might use to wire up your electric fire at home. And I'm going to put one end of it in a moment into my intense light source here. And I'm going to ask, what is your name? I'm going to ask Stephen to unreel it to the top of the audience, then pass it along a row. Just leave me a little bit of it here. Just walk up the stairs, right? And you see it handles like flex, and it's as flexible. You can wind it onto a drum. And think of this: we are now sending light down a thickness of glass, like a window pane, but 50 feet thick. So the glass must be rather special from the absorption point of view for not too much light to be lost in the process. You see, it's widening its way all around the audience now. We've nearly got to the end of that row. And when we come to the end of that row, I would like the girl who's sitting there to take the two ends and use them to illuminate her face. Just points them at your face. There we are. And there's no cheating, because if I take this little plug out here, the light disappears. If I plug it back in again. So we've made, not only have we make light go around corners, but we've really sent an appreciable amount of light through a piece of flexible cable 50 feet long. Now, this is really quite a tour de force, because each one of those two light guides in that cable contained about 400 individual fibers to make it flexible enough, and you can bend the thing through quite a small radius without breaking any of the fibers. So we now know of a way of sending light over great distances with very small losses, and this is not only of interest from the point of view of getting illumination, but it's also increasingly being investigated from the point of view of sending messages. Because it's a very high frequency of light, you could use a single fiber to do the same job as quite a large number of ordinary telephone and radio cables. And the GPO in this country is now experimenting with methods of using glass fibers many, many kilometers long to send a very large number simultaneously, a very large number of telephone calls and television cables and radio cables at hopefully a reduction in cost for these services. Now, right, so much for just sending light over distances. Now, it is also possible to send pictures over distances by these means. And I've got a demonstration here which will illustrate this. I've got a bundle here of 25 quite thick individual fibers. Now, these happen to be made out of plastic, a high refractive index plastic in the middle, and a coating of a lower refractive index plastic. And I've started the 25 of them inside a tube here. And if I get this at the right angle to the light, you can just see the end of my 25 fibers arranged in a 5 by 5 matrix, a 5 by 5 arrangement here. So we've got 25 picture points. Now, each of those fibers can only transmit the brightness or darkness of a particular point of a picture. So we aren't going to get a very good picture out of 25 points. Just to put this into perspective, a television picture has 625 lines, and we can think of it being able to resolve 625 points along each line. So the number of individual picture points on a television picture would be 600 times 600. That's 360,000. We've only got 25. On the other hand, if we were to go back to Baird's kind of television, which actually was demonstrated in this hall in the, I should imagine, the 1920s, then he was at one time using a television system having as few as 8 lines, and I suppose about 8 picture points along each line. So he was having a 64-point television picture, and that wasn't really so very different from the kind of picture which we can see on here. So I've got my 25 fibers here. I put them back into here, and the RI part should come up. If you haven't seen this before, here's the R, and here's the I. Now, it's of course important that the fibers at the output end should have exactly the same geometrical relationship as the fibers at the input end. Otherwise, the parts of the picture will get themselves crossed over. I can make this happen on here. If I change over 3 of these pairs of fibers, which I may say I've carefully marked previously, because one can get oneself into a most terrible muddle and never get the picture right again. You see how the picture, already how the picture has changed. You need a certain amount of skill to do this. And one more pair to change over. Oh, I've just broken one of them off. One of the disadvantages that I'll make a virtue out of my accident here. Just broken one of the fibers off. So there'll be a dark spot there. But you can see the light coming out of the end of this fiber here. I can try and poke it back into its house to see whether I can get the... Have I made connection again? Well, sort of, not very convincingly. But you can see that the picture has now been scrambled. We started off with a picture which had RI on it, like this. Here, here's the R portion, and here's the I portion, and we've now scrambled it. But of course, I can deliberately put a scrambled picture in, and use the fact that I've mixed the fibers up to unscramble the picture again. In fact, this is a picture in code, if you like, and this is my decoding machine for making sense of the picture again. Now, I only hope that I'm going to put it in here the right way around. And we've got something like RI back again. I've broken one of the fibers, so we seem to still have one mistake here. So my code breaking doesn't appear to have been quite as successful as it might have been. But I hope you at least see the principle that providing you know what the mix-up of the fibers has been, and you encode your message appropriately beforehand, you can use this thing as a decoding device. And this, in fact, has been done. If you had, for instance, 10,000 fibers, you could arrange them in a pretty random fashion, and would take an enormous and impossible amount of trial and error to break the code to find out again which way the fibers actually would have had to be arranged to make a sense of the picture. Now, I also like to have a look at this, and if you lower the lights for a moment, can we just lower the lights? How efficient these fibers are, because virtually none of the light leaks out. The light all comes out at the end here. The actual coating of the fibers is so efficient that there are almost no imperfections as a reflecting surface, and we therefore get a great proportion of the light actually being transmitted down the fibers. Well, so much for a very primitive picture. What I would like you to show you now is one of the really remarkable technological features of using fiber optics by showing you a device which is known as an endoscope. I'm now going to plug it into its light source, which is what light source is really for. What I've got here is a very flexible, looks rather like a very flexible tube. Now this tube contains within it one bundle of fibers, which is very similar to the bundle of fibers which we passed up into the audience. It merely serves to carry light into the system. If I just turn it down, so I can show it to you without blinding you, you can see the light coming out of this one channel here. I'll vary its intensity. There you are. So that's one channel, and we already know how that channel works. There's a second channel which is in here, which is a coherent bundle, as the bundles are called, where the arrangement of the fibers at the input end and the exit end is geometrically exactly the same. So we can send a picture up that bundle. We can illuminate the scene. We have a little lens in the front here, which forms a picture on the end of a coherent bundle, and we can then send that picture up here to be looked at through a sort of microscope by the operator of this machine. And I can actually see, so not entirely in focus, I can see the whole audience through this tiny lens in the front here. Now, before I say any more about this, I'd just like to show you a slide of the endoscope, or gastroscope as this particular one is called. Here's a cross-section of a short length of it. There are 4 channels in it. The first channel at the top here we are already familiar with. That is a light guide which leads the light down from the outside to illuminate the scene which we want to see. Then this channel here, the third one from the top, is a coherent fiber bundle which takes the picture back from this end back to the eyepiece on here. On this end here would have a little lens, just like a camera, which throws an image onto the end of the bundle. Then this channel here, we can have water or air blown down. Water is useful for cleaning up the lens, which may get all mucky and being passed down into the stomach. And finally, there's a fourth channel here, which is just an empty tube through which a number of different tools can be passed. And this picture here is really a portrait of the end of the endoscope. Here you see the camera lens, or the lens which produces the image for the fiber bundle. Here's the end of the light guide. Here's a tunnel for the tools. And finally, here's a windscreen washer, which can be used to squirt water over the picture-taking part of it in order to keep it clean. Now let's go back to the endoscope itself. There's a channel down which one can pass a tool. And I've got a tool here. You can see it coming out of here. I'll turn this down so that you can see it better. There's a tool which is coming out of here now, and I can operate a little grab on the end of this tool. So one can, for instance, take little samples of tissue, which one might want to examine under the microscope, or one can retrieve objects which some careless child might have swallowed, and I'm trying to give you a demonstration of that afterwards, so not on a real child, may I say. Or have any of you swallowed interesting articles recently? But this isn't all. There's something which is even more fascinating on this, and that is that if you wanted to push this gastroscope, this is one which is meant to go into the stomach, down the fairly complicated tube, first around the back of the throat, then down into the stomach, and your stomach curves around. It wouldn't be very, very useful to have a thing which was just flaccid, which was just completely flexible like this. And rather fascinatingly, you can make the end, you can steer the end, you can make it move around. It's now looking at you. Down, 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 down. And this makes it very much easier, of course, not only to pass the instrument in the first instance, but when you are, for instance, inside the stomach, you can then literally have a look around in this sort of way to see whether there are any abnormalities, for instance, whether you can see an ulcer inside the stomach. Well, I should emphasize at this stage that I'm not an expert at this. I am here to explain to you the marvels of technology and how they can be applied to medicine. To use one of these gastroscopes requires a good deal of training. People called gastroenterologists, special kind of doctors, would use these. And they really become very good indeed in looking down here, in manipulating this joystick at the same time, and really having a feeling, rather like driving a car by remote control, that is they themselves who are at the end of that, steering it. Because as you tunnel your way through the body, it does require, you can see them moving around and walking around and moving this sort of thing, really imagining themselves crawling along the same kind of passages. And this requires a good deal of training and a good deal of experience. Now, it would be quite unfair if I was the only one who was allowed to look through the end of this device. So we've made some special arrangements. It's quite common, I wonder, Robin, if you would like to come along. It's quite common to attach a camera, either an ordinary photographic camera, to the top of a gastroscope and to take pictures. And it's also been done to put a small television camera on there, which gives black and white pictures. But we believe here for the first time, we may actually have joined a proper BBC color camera to this form of instrument. We've made a special adapter, and I'm now going to put the instrument itself onto here. Right? And now I'm now going to come around to the other side to operate it. And whilst I'm doing so, perhaps Bill could produce my stomach for me. I told you I wasn't going to do this on one of you. So let me get my instrument around the side here. I think I must move the thing a bit further over here. And first, so that you really do believe me that this can actually see something, I'm going to get it to look into my pocket. See if I've got anything in my pocket which is worth looking at. Take my diaries out and things like that. Here we are. Let's see if we can see what is there anything in my pocket which is of interest. So only looking at the material of my pocket at present. No interesting devices in my pocket. I'm trying to find something in my pocket which has got some print on it. Here we are. It's all these people who put radio microphones onto me who filled my pocket with other things. Now what have we here? Admit one, Mr. Heinz Wolff. Well. So you can see that I can look around corners and we can actually see proper things. Now what I'm going to do now is to pass this into the stomach, into my training stomach here. But I suppose before I go into a pure model, let me look into the mouth of one of you. I won't actually put it down your throat. There was somebody whose teeth I was going to look at. Can I just go and come and look at your teeth and see whether you can recognize this? First, what's your name? Sandra. Let's see if we can look at Sandra's teeth through this thing here. No, keep your mouth closed for a moment. There we are, a beautiful set of teeth. Let's see if just open your mouth and see if you can see anything in your mouth. We're now looking at the top of Sandra's mouth, the back of her teeth, there, and her tongue, there, the end of her tongue, and the bottom of her teeth, and that's just her lip coming up there. So now I think you will already have realized, thank you very much, Sandra. I think you've already realized that the moment you see something which isn't at all familiar, it's very easy to lose your way. For instance, the inside of the mouth, because we don't normally look at the inside of our mouth, already becomes strange territory. And this is another part where the training becomes important, because you've really got to know your geography, like a taxi driver, very well to be able to find your way. Anyway, let me now put it down the esophagus of my patient here. Now, there's something rather strange about this patient, that I've actually got a window, so I can see what I'm doing. Perhaps this isn't quite fair, but this is a training aid for people who are trying to get used to using these. You feed it slowly down the stomach. There we are, and hello. It can look at you, and it will now start having a look around inside there, and I wonder what we can see. First, somebody appears to have left a wood screw lying around inside there. That's really rather careless. But look, let's look for more medical sort of things in here, because see, I'm not very good at driving. Not really very good at driving this thing yet. There we are. Look around and we're looking around inside, and there in the distance there, we might be able to see something which is intended to be something rather like an ulcer. There we are. We see a round thing with a little hole in the middle. The bottom of the screen. There looks rather like an inflated tire with a metal rim to it. You see it? A pretty green one. And in this training aid here, there are dummy ulcers all over the place. And the people who are learning to do this have to go and find all of them. And though we haven't got it connected this way, every time they touch one of them, one of these lights lights up, so they know what the score is when they're being taught how to do this. Rather a fancy way of playing pinball type of machines in an amusement hall. I'm not sure this would catch on, but it certainly is a game of skill. Well, what I'm going to try now is to see whether I can retrieve one of these foreign bodies, the screw, or there's some nuts and bolts and so on inside there as well. There may even be safety. I think there's a safety pin inside. Let me put it in a more suitable place where I can actually, that's not fair. I wouldn't normally be allowed to do that. Let's see whether I can withdraw it a little bit here and see whether I can illuminate it. Now, there's a nut. I'm approaching a nut there. There's a nut of the kind, of a nut and bolt kind, and I'm going to shoot out my tool in a moment. There. don't know if this can be seen. There's my tool coming out. And I'm now going to try and steer this in such a way that I can get something. I seem to have hooked the it's again like one of these amusement arcades where you can hook. No, I lost the safety pin again. No, I'm too impetuous to do this. Right, I've got the safety pin there. If I now maneuver this, there we are. Don't know whether you can see this, can you? I've got the safety pin in the jaws of this little thing. I've grasped it. Now, I'm not sure that I should be able to go and actually pull it out through the esophagus of this. Because normally one would be able to pummel the patient as well whilst doing this. Here we are. One safety pin. And if I now release this again, there we are. Safety pin has been retrieved. Now I think this gives you, I think, some idea of the power of this sort of technique. Admittedly, I made life easier for myself. Most people don't have a little window in the side, which makes it easier to do this. It would have to be done entirely, looking through the top, and nevertheless operating under direct vision. And there certainly are some kinds of endoscopes under which you can do a certain amount of minor surgery, which have other kinds of tools which you can push down there, little nippers, so you can cut off little polyps, or little scoops, so you can take off a little bit of tissue for microscopic examination. So it may often save surgery, because this is a way of really doing something under remote control and under direct vision. Now, if you want to get into very complicated parts of the body, you can aid this technique by watching it from the outside as well, using X-rays. And in tomorrow's lecture, we will be watching moving things under X-ray. So one could use this endoscopic technique in conjunction with being able to watch from the outside precisely where the endoscope is as a further aid to its guidance. Right. Well, we now turn it off. I must say I'm very, very impressed with instruments of this kind. Needless to say, they're very hard to make. To make this coherent bundle with all the fibers are in the right places is an expensive and difficult job. It's therefore not at all surprising that instruments of this sort of kind cost something like £5,000. So it's a big investment. But if you think that it might either makes a difference between deciding to do surgery or not deciding to do surgery, it's probably not at all a bad investment. Now, having finished with this aspect of fiber optics, I just want to take a moment off and show you another instrument which also uses fiber optics. And this is this instrument here. Now, before I tell you what it does, I want you to just quickly look down this hole here, because I have to plug this in again afterwards to warm up. If you look down that hole, you see a flickering red light at the bottom of it, there. Now, I'm going to plug this in again and press a few appropriate buttons, then tell you what this machine does. Now, the purpose of this machine is to measure how good my blood is to carry oxygen. You remember in our second lecture, we talked about the heart and the importance of the heart in pumping blood all around the body. But one of the purposes of pumping blood around the body, of course, is to supply all the parts of the body with oxygen. And to be able to do that, about 50% of our blood is occupied by red cells, and red cells are really no more than little parcels of hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is the pigment which makes our blood look red, and also, incidentally, is a substance which carries the oxygen. Now, there's a limited amount, of course, of oxygen which a given amount of hemoglobin can carry. Sort of like carrying a rucksack full of something. There's a rucksack eventually which comes too heavy to you. Now, we want to know how much of its maximum load of oxygen a given amount of hemoglobin carries. Because if something has gone wrong in somebody's lungs, for instance, or in somebody's circulation, the blood may not have the chance to pick up its full cargo of oxygen, and the hemoglobin therefore won't saturate itself with oxygen as it ought to. Now this method, this machine, is there to measure how well the hemoglobin is doing its job in loading itself up completely with oxygen. This is called the oxygen saturation. Now it does that by shining light through part of my ear. And in doing so, of course, there is some blood inside my ear, in the little blood vessels. And I think you've all probably heard about somebody going blue in the face if they can't breathe for some time. This is because the color of blood which isn't carrying oxygen is in fact a bit different from the color of blood which is carrying oxygen. So by having more than one color light being shone through my ear, it is possible for a computer inside this machine to work out not only how much hemoglobin there is in my ear, but what proportion of it is actually carrying oxygen. Now let's see if we can make it do that. The reason that that fiber optics come into this is that the light of the different colors is being made inside this machine, and it's being sent up through a bundle of tiny glass fibers, just like the light guide which we sent up into the audience, to one half of this transducer which goes onto my ear, and there's a photoelectric cell which picks up the light and which then sends the electrical signal down again. Now I wonder if I can do this by myself. I'm going to get my ear into this little gap here, right? And I put this little cover over the top so as to keep the lights out. We just have to wait for the machine to settle down for a moment. Now the number which appears on the front of the machine here shows that my hemoglobin is 96% saturated, which is quite normal. This is one very rarely gets up as high as 100%. And on this recorder here, which I'm going to switch on, this position of the pen there, I'm going to get the chart going as well. You see a straight line being drawn here now, just starting from underneath the pen. It indicates the 96 saturation. I'm now going to attempt to suffocate myself, purely in the service of showing you that I can actually desaturate some of my hemoglobin by actually using up oxygen without supplying any more. Now I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to run on the spot, and I literally get blue in the face. And if you watch the those squiggles there, you shouldn't take any notice of. I must have been moving my ear. If you watch this line, you will see what happens to my hemoglobin saturation. So I'm going to start holding my breath now. Now you see I got into a nasty bump here because the deoxygenated blood from my legs was getting around to my ear and was being measured by this. I'm now taking a few deep breaths, and quite quickly my lungs supplied oxygen to the blood again, and my hemoglobin saturation went up again and is now nearly back to normal. Whew. So in a sense, this was only about 5% or so. And one can quite happily live with hemoglobin saturations of 70% or even 60%. But the body contains some control mechanisms which make one very uncomfortable if this happens suddenly, because the body starts, hey, what's happening? Why isn't any oxygen coming along, and wants to try and make you breathe. So this is by holding your breath for any length of time is partly a matter of practice. I mean, divers, for instance, people who dive into water get rather better at it than I am. But there are control mechanisms which are driven by the lack of oxygen and the increase in carbon dioxide, which make you want to breathe very hard. Right. Well, now, in order to allow me to recover, I would like to show you something else about the heart. We've now done the probes part, if you like. We've had a probe which goes down inside people. We've had a probe which went onto my ear. I now wanted to tell you just a little bit more about the heart. Now, you will remember that in the second lecture, you heard my heart sounds. The boom, 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 boom. Now, if you listen carefully, you'll hear that sound is really made out of two sounds: rubbed up, rubbed up, rubbed up, rubbed up. And let's look at the slide, which is on there already, to get some idea what people think is the origin of those sounds. Now, you remember that this big muscle here is a ventricle, which does all the work, really. And there must be a valve here, a valve in the aorta, through which the blood is ejected. But to stop it all flowing back into the heart again, when the muscle relaxes, there has to be a valve here, just as there has to be a valve in your bicycle tire to stop all the air coming out again once you've pumped your bicycle tire up. Similarly, the auricle here acts as a sort of reservoir to supply blood for the ventricle, and there has to be another valve here, so that as soon as the ventricle starts to contract, rather than the blood going back up here again, it goes out here. So there must be a valve here which shuts the moment the ventricle starts to contract. Now, it is thought that the two sounds which you can hear, that the first sound is the valve which is really across here, shutting, going pop, and that the second sound is due to the blood having left the heart, the pressure inside the heart now being lower than that in the aorta, and this valve shutting, giving you the second sound. Now, we're just going to do an experiment to show you how likely this theory is. Catherine, if you can come and assist me. What I've got here are two beakers of blood. It isn't really blood. And I've got a sort of artificial ventricle here. And Catherine, in a moment, is going to use her hand. I hope this isn't full of water. No. Catherine's going to use her hand to supply the power of the ventricular muscle. She's going to do this sort of thing. And in doing this sort of thing, what she will do is to pump water from one beaker into the other beaker, just as the heart does. And I'm going to put my microphone on the appropriate part. Can you just put your hand on there, Catherine? Just somebody push my microphone over back to me. I'm going to put my microphone just outside the aorta, as it were, and let's see what sort of sounds we get there. Sound remarkably like the sounds which you also hear two sounds there, which are the valve opening and shutting, and the sort of shudder of the actual column of liquid. All right, don't drown me. Right, thank you very much, Catherine. I think we're running out of blood here. Let me just do another stroke or two. One can produce sounds which are remarkably like the sounds which you hear from my heart, for exactly the same reason, because there is in fact a valve here, and there's another valve here. This valve here stops it being blown out again when you compress this. This valve here makes sure that the liquid continues to travel in one direction. Now, I'm going to play you another noise, which I've recorded on the tape recorder. And I won't tell you what it is. At least, perhaps I'll give you some clues as you hear, but I want you to listen carefully. Is my bath running out? Or is it my central heating system at home? Or what do you think it was? That's another one. Right? What do you think it is? No, it happens nearer the other end of the body. No, the noises you were actually hearing were my gut noises. I'm sure you've sometimes embarrassed yourself or maybe other people by being very hungry and sitting there with your stomach rumbling, literally, your stomach rumbling. Well, after the last lecture, I hadn't had any lunch, and I got home, and I was very hungry, and I tucked the microphone into the waistband of my trousers, and that was what the microphone picked up. It was my stomach rumbling, or the top of my small intestine, with water and with liquid contents and gas being pushed along it from time to time. Anyway, these gut noises have some value medically. I didn't just record this for fun, because when doctors are interested to find out whether the gut is active at all or whether it has been paralyzed, then the presence of noises is quite a valuable indication that something is actually happening inside the gut. Now, perhaps I ought to put these sounds earlier on, because historically speaking, of course, listening to what goes on inside the body probably preceded all these methods which I've shown you in these lectures, because the sounds have always been available. And doctors, I'm sure, ever since there were doctors, laid their ear against various parts of their patient's body to find out what was going on inside. And later on, to preserve decency and decorum, invented stethoscopes so they can keep their distance from the patient. The stethoscope at first was merely a roll of newspaper. The very first stethoscope was just a roll of newspaper to be put between the chest of a young maiden and the old doctor's ears. But then they became a little bit more elaborate. But noises, of course, are a very important clue to what actually goes on inside the body. Now, I suppose it is a natural lead-in from the kind of noises which my body makes to using, or at least my gut makes, to using rather more elaborate ways of finding out what actually goes on in my gastrointestinal canal. Now, I told you right at the beginning of the lecture that there are, roughly speaking, 30 feet of us. That when we measure 30 feet from mouth to rectum, you can use endoscopes to investigate a few feet from either end, but you certainly can't at all easily investigate the whole of the length of 30 feet. And it was, I suppose, about 15 years ago that in a number of laboratories, including my own, people had the idea of making very, very small radiotransmitters which could be swallowed and which would make measurements as they were being carried quite naturally through the gastrointestinal canal. Well, I've got one of these radiotransmitters here. Now, this actually is only a model. Even elephants, I think, would find it hard to swallow one of these. But let's see before I show you this in greater detail, let's see if we can find a slide. Well, here's a rather formalized cross-section, often a radio pill, or rather more elaborately, an endoradiosonde, as they are sometimes known. It consists really of three quite separate compartments. The first part at the bottom here is a battery which powers it, and depending on the exact construction, these batteries will last anything from about 24 hours to perhaps 3 or 4 days. There isn't much point in making them last very much longer than that for reasons which I think will be obvious to all of you. Then there is a section here which is a true radiotransmitter. And these radiotransmitters, certainly on this generation of pills, are all perhaps rather appropriately tuned to operate in the marine distress band around 500 kilocycles. However, they don't normally attract lifeboats or searching aircraft and so on, because their range is only a few feet. So there's no fear that we suddenly have a convergence of the rescue services on the Royal Institution. And then at the top here is that part of the pill which is actually responsible for picking up the measurement which we want to make. Now, in this particular case here, this is a pressure pill, and it consists of a metal diaphragm, a tightly stretched metal diaphragm, which will bend when pressure is applied to it. And in bending, it will change the tuning of the transmitter. In fact, the method which is used in changing the tuning of the transmitter is not at all dissimilar, this device up here, is not at all dissimilar from the method which is used in tuning some FM radio receivers. So what this pill does is that it turns changes in pressure into changes in the frequency at which it transmits. It changes its wavelengths, as we would like to say. Well, let's now go back to the model here. Here are the same three sections. Up here is a transducer section, here's the electronic section, and down here is a battery. And if I now carefully press this model as a pressure pill, and I press harder, and I release my pressure, and I press harder, and I release my pressure, this in model form demonstrate the kind of things which you will hear in a moment. Let's put this out of the way. Now I've actually got some of these. I've got some of these pills here, and the first one, which I would like to show you, is a pressure pill. Here's a pressure pill. You see, it's about 2 centimeters long. It's rather less than 1 centimeter in diameter. And I've got a receiver here, which I'm going to tune into it. I'm now pressing the end of the pill. Now, let's turn this down for a moment. And just to show this out, but I'm not cheating, let's put this very dangerous experiment here, which Bill and I have doing. We always get very wet in doing this. We're going to work this pill down into a balloon. Like that. And I'm just milking it down. The pill is now inside the balloon here. I hope I wouldn't let go. I will tune into it again. Now, what's actually happening here? Is that I'm increasing the pressure inside this balloon. The pill is picking up the pressure increase, and it's being converted into a frequency change, which we are receiving on the transmitter, on the receiver. But we can do better than that, because I've got one of these pills inside me. I swallowed one earlier on today. And if I can find out where it's... Now, Matthew, if you'd like to come along. I don't let everybody do this. And just push me gently into my stomach, please. Now, I thank you very much, Matthew. You'll be glad to know that Matthew was very gentle with me. He tried this earlier on and punched me in the stomach. Now, let me just demonstrate. Let's tuck this into my trousers. For instance, if I try to lift something, if I try to lift the Royal Institution, would you expect the pressure inside my abdomen to go up or down? Right? Let's see if this happens. Now, it is this effect, of course, which gives people a hernia or rupture, because if they try and lift something which is too heavy for them, the contents of their abdomen becomes the pressure inside their abdomen becomes too large for the abdominal wall, and you get a bit of the contents breaking through and causing a rupture. This is one could, for instance, use these pills to investigate what kind of pressures people were developing in lifting heavy objects. Now, there is another kind of pill, and I've got one of these here, which is sensitive to temperature. And there are, in fact, also pills which are sensitive to acidity. Now I have to keep myself out of the way of the aerial. I try and tune into this one. Yes, that is the one. Now, if you listen to it, I'm going to warm it up in my hand. It isn't going to take as long as the other pills, of course. It's going to take longer, rather, because it takes some time for the heat to penetrate. Becoming rapidly supersonic. Now, well, let me. This is one, isn't it? Yes. It's warming up quite slowly. But as a tour de force, what I will do now, I'll now swallow it. Now, this swallowing isn't anywhere near as difficult as you think, because one swallows things which are bigger than this, peach stones and bits of potatoes and so on, quite commonly. Just make sure the battery is nicely screwed in. Which of these is... down. And that's... I've got two pills inside me now, of course, which is... Now that's the temperature one. You see the temperature rising. If you look at this dial here, the temperature is rising quite rapidly because it's warm in my stomach, of course. But you can hear the temperature pill now. I'm going to drink some hot water now and see whether we can change the reading. Take a minute or two. There it goes. Now warming up to the hot water, which has gone into my stomach. Remember, the effects aren't very large because there's a lot of other things in my stomach already. My lunch, for instance, is still there. Now I'm going to try and get my pressure pill back, and it just so happens that my temperature pill seems to be up here somewhere, and my pressure pill, which I've swallowed before lunch, seems to be further down by now. I'm going to try and receive that now. Unfortunately, the two pills seem to be very nearly in the same frequency. That's my pressure pill back again. Right, and this, I think, is a fitting goodbye to all of you. Letting my pressure pill say goodbye to you. The newest art form is belly dancing with sound, which I'm now doing. You can make the end, you can steer the end. You can make it move around. It's now looking at you. Down, 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 down. and this makes it very much easier, of course, not only to pass the instrument in the first instance, but when you are, for instance, inside the stomach, you can then literally have a look around in this sort of way to see whether there are any abnormalities, for instance, whether you can see an ulcer inside the stomach. Well, I should emphasize at this stage that I'm not an expert at this. I am here to explain to you the marvels of technology and how they can be applied to medicine. To use one of these gastroscopes requires a good deal of training. People called gastroenterologists, specialist kind of doctors, would use these. And they really become very good indeed in looking down here, in manipulating this joystick at the same time, and really having a feeling, rather like driving a car by remote control, that is they themselves who are at the end of that, steering it. Because as you tunnel your way through the body, it does require, you can see them moving around and walking around and moving this sort of thing, really imagining themselves crawling along the same kind of passages. And this requires a good deal of training and a good deal of experience. Now, it would be quite unfair if I was the only one who was allowed to look through the end of this device. So we've made some special arrangements.